Pain. There comes a time in every believer's life when everything feels shattered. You look around and all you see are the broken pieces. Broken dreams, broken relationships. Pain, broken finances, broken confidence, and even a broken sense of purpose. You try to fix it with your own hands, but the pieces keep slipping through your fingers. Pain, that's when God says, stand still because I'm about to send something into your house that you can't manufacture, manipulate, or manage on your own. When God sends angels to your home, everything broken starts to heal. When God sends angels to your home, pain, they do not arrive in moments of ease and comfort. They come in the midst of brokenness. When everything around you seems to have collapsed, pain, and you are standing in the ruins of what once was. You see, we often think the presence of God's angels reserved for holy moments on mountaintops, but in reality, pain, heaven's army is most active in the valley. Angels are attracted to obedience, but they are assigned to brokenness. They do not descend when you are standing tall. They descend when you are on your knees. That is the pattern of divine intervention. When life breaks you down to your lowest, it is only because heaven is preparing to lift in higher than you have ever been before. When the enemy thinks he has crushed you beyond recovery, pain, that's when God dispatches angels to your home, not to pity you, but to empower you. When everything seems out of control, when the bills are piling, pain, when the diagnosis is grim, when relationships are fractured, and your confidence is gone, that's not the moment God turns away, that's the moment he leans in. The same God who sent an angel to Elijah when he was too weary to continue is the same God who will send divine assistance to you in your place of despair. Elijah lay under a tree, give up, whispering to God that he had nothing left. But the angel of the Lord touched him and said, get up and eat. Notice. And the angel didn't deliver a sermon, he delivered strength. Angels are not always sent to change your situation. Sometimes, pain, they're sent to change your strength in the situation. They come with sustenance for your spirit. They come with energy for your soul. Pain, they come with a reminder that even in the place of collapse, God has not abandoned you. Your brokenness is not a sign that God has left you. From pain, it's evidence that heaven is paying attention. The sound of your breaking is what summons angels to your side. Pain is the fragrance of humility that attracts the movement of heaven. The Bible says God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble, and where grace flows, angels work. Hey, when you humble yourself in your pain and still lift your eyes to heaven, heaven begins to move. There are some healings that will only happen after something has been broken. And because as long as we remain unbroken, we rely on our own strength. But once we are shattered, we begin to lean on divine power. And that's when angels are released to operate. In Scripture, every time angels were sent, there was either a divine message or a divine move. Pain, when Hagar cried in the wilderness, feeling abandoned with her son. Pain, an angel came not to deliver her from the desert, but to open her eyes to see the well that was already nearby. That's what happens in your home when God sends angels. Pain, they do not create something new from heaven. They open your eyes to what was already in your reach but hidden by your tears. Angels awaken awareness, they bring revelation. Pain, they remind you that even in brokenness, provision has already been made. The well is already near. The answer has already been spoken. The miracle has already been set in motion. You just need a divine vision to see it. The truth is, sometimes your pain blinds you to your promise. Pain, you can be so focused on what's falling apart that you miss what's being built. The angels God sends into your life are often not there to rebuild your walls. Pain, to remind you who the builder is, but whisper divine truth into the cracks of your soul. They move through your home like wind, soft, unseen, but undeniably felt. Pain, when you wake up one morning and suddenly have peace about a situation that used to torment you. That's not coincidence, that's an angel finishing its assignment. Pain, when your spirit suddenly feels lighter, when forgiveness becomes easier, when courage begins to rise, it is not just your mindset shifting, it's heaven touching your mind. God never wastes a broken season. Brokenness creates dependence. Dependence creates openness. Openness invites divine presence. And where the divine presence dwells, healing flows. The reason God allows certain things to break is because he knows that only broken things can truly be filled. A cup that's already full has no room for more. Pain. But a cracked vessel can hold more of God's glory because his power is made perfect in weakness. That's why the broken places in your life are sacred. Pain, they are not evidence of God's absence. They are proof of his preparation. The cracks are where the light enters. The losses are where faith learns to grow. When angels come, pain, they don't always arrive with trumpets and glory. Sometimes they come quietly. They come through people. Someone calls at the right time. Someone blesses you unexpectedly. And someone speaks word pierced that through your despair. That's not random, that's divine. The angels of God are not limited to the invisible realm. Sometimes they wear human faces. They carry compassion instead of wings, but their purpose is the same: to deliver heaven's touch to your situation. God dispatches them to speak encouragement, to bring provision, to help lift what feels too heavy for you to carry. If you have ever been in a place where you were sure you couldn't go on, but somehow you did. An angel came to your house when you were about to lose your mind, but peace kept you from falling apart. An angel stood watch over your thoughts when you were surrounded by chaos, but something in you said, keep believing. That wasn't willpower, that was the divine whisper of an angel assigned to your breakthrough. God's angels are not distant, they are deeply personal. They move with purpose, and their mission's restoration. When everything around you is breaking, heaven is rebuilding. You may not see it yet, but the construction has already started. While you're crying, heaven is orchestrating. While you're sleeping, angels are strategizing. You think you're waiting on God, but often God is waiting on you to surrender enough for the angels to begin their work, because angels respond to alignment, not anxiety. They are attracted to faith, not fear. When you stop trying to fix everything and start trusting that God is already working, that's when divine movement begins. The greatest mistake we make in broken seasons is assuming that broken means finished. But the kingdom principle, it's opposite of what's broken can finally be blessed. When Jesus broke the bread, it multiplied. When the alabaster box was broken, the fragrance filled the room. When your heart is broken, the worship becomes real. When your plans are broken, God's purpose becomes clear. That's why heaven often sends angels in the midst of your breaking, to remind you that you're not being punished, you're being positioned. Every home where angels arrive, healing begins, but it rarely begins in the way you expect. It might not start with the fixing of the problem. It might start with the softening of your heart. Healing might come through forgiveness. It might come through release. It might come the courage to begin again. Angels don't always change the situation. Sometimes they change your posture toward it. They help you see that what was going to break you is actually building you into who God called you to be. The arrival of angels marks the shift from striving to surrender. It's that sacred moment when your tears become prayers and your prayers become portals. Heaven begins to open, not because you have strength, but because you have finally yielded. That's when angels start working in your home, clearing spiritual clutter, stirring up divine favor, opening doors you didn't even knock on. You'll begin to notice small things aligning, conversations flowing, opportunities returning. You'll sense restoration moving quietly through your space like wind through trees. And when God sends angels, they don't just heal what's visible, and heal what's hidden. They reach into the silent corners of your heart, the ones you don't talk about, the ones you thought no one noticed. They bring light to the memories that still hurt. They sweep away the dust of disappointment, and they remind you that you were never alone. Healing begins where truth enters. And angels are carriers of divine truth. They don't flatter, they reveal. They uncover lies you believed about yourself and replace them with the voice of heaven. You're not forsaken, you're not forgotten, you're being formed. Every broken thing in your life becomes a classroom where angels teach you faith. They don't teach with words alone, they teach through presence. They show you that peace is not the absence of problems, but the awareness of God in the midst of them. When you sense calm in chaos, that's heaven's language saying, I am still here. When your heart finds rest in uncertainty, and that's the evidence that angels are at work. God is meticulous about timing. He never sends angels late. He sends them at the moment when your natural strength runs out, so that no one can take credit for what he restores. When you testify about your healing, you know it wasn't luck, it wasn't coincidence, it wasn't human help, it was divine orchestration. He even intervened. God sent help you didn't even know how to pray for. You'll realize that every tear was a seed, every pain was a preparation, and every delay was a setup for restoration. So when you find yourself surrounded by broken pieces, don't despise the season. Stand in it with expectation. Say, Lord, if this is what you're allowing, then I know you're also assigning. Send your angels to my home, touch every room, heal every heart, restore every promise, and then rest. Because once you prayed it, heaven has already responded. Angels are already moving. You may not see the evidence yet, but the atmosphere is shifting. In time, and the same places where you cried will become the places where you praise. The same home that once echoed with sorrow will resound with testimony. The same person who was once broken will become a vessel of healing for others. That's what happens when God sends angels to your home. brokenness doesn't win. Pain doesn't have the final word, heaven does. And heaven always speaks restoration, always works redemption, always moves in love. Pain. So let the brokenness be the signal that heaven is near. Let your surrender be the invitation for angels to enter, because the moment they arrive, healing begins, not just in your body, but in your spirit, in your emotions, in your relationships, and in your destiny. And when everything broken starts to heal, pain, you will understand that what felt like your ending was actually God's introduction to your next chapter. Heaven has visited your house. Pain, nothing will ever be the same again. When God sends angels to your home, they bring more than comfort. They bring transformation. Pain and the very presence carries the healing power of heaven, and wherever heaven is welcomed, restoration follows. The moment divine presence steps into your atmosphere, everything begins to shift. The weight that once pressed down on your chest starts to lift. The thought once overwhelmed your mind begin to calm. Pain and the air in your home feel different. It's not imagination, it's impartation. The presence of God through his angels turns ordinary space into sacred ground. What was once the place of pain becomes the place of peace. You begin to sense that something unseen is working in your favor, adjusting the invisible to heal the visible. Pain. That is what happens when divine presence activates restoration. You see, heaven does not operate in confusion. When God's messengers arrive, they carry order in their wings. Pain, they don't come just to comfort you. They come to realign you. Every chaotic situation in your home, every argument, every misunderstanding, pain, every fear that's been sitting like a dark cloud begins to encounter the divine order of heaven. When the angelic presence moves through your life, pain, confusion gives way to clarity. You may not have all the answers, but suddenly you have peace in not knowing. That's the mark of divine activity. Peace is heaven's fingerprint. The angel doesn't need to fix everything instantly. Their presence itself becomes the evidence that everything is already being fixed. Sometimes we expect God's intervention to come in visible form, sudden miracle, a loud sign, but divine presence is often silent power. Angels move with precision and not noise. They don't need to announce themselves because the evidence of their arrival is transformation itself. Pang, you wake up one morning and realize that the bitterness you carried for years suddenly feels lighter. The anger that burned in your chest no longer consumes you. The anxiety that used to control your night starts to lose its grip. That's the quiet miracle of divine presence. The angel doesn't remove the memory. It removes the sting. You remember the pain, but you are no longer controlled by it. That's what restoration feels like. Restoration doesn't always look dramatic at first. Pain, it begins internally, an unseen alignment of your spirit. Angels don't begin by fixing the surface. They start by healing the root. Pain. They touch the unseen parts of your heart, the wounds that you've learned to live with, the disappointments you've stopped mentioning. Pain, the moments you've tried to bury under routine. Divine presence doesn't just patch what's broken, it restores what was lost. It brings back the strength to hope again. It revives the courage to believe again. It stirs the will to love again. When divine presence fills your home, it changes the atmosphere before it changes the circumstances. Pain, you can feel it in the air, a holy stillness, a sense of calm, even when everything outside still looks chaotic. Pain, that's because peace doesn't depend on what's happening around you. It flows from what's happening within you. When angels come, pain, they carry the same atmosphere as heaven itself. They bring with them the same peace that surrounds God's throne, and that peace begins to permeate every corner of your home. The arguments start to quiet, the tension begins to ease, the worry begins to lose its hold. The presence of God doesn't just bring relief, it brings realignment. And when the presence of heaven enters a place, disorder cannot remain. Angels are carriers of divine authority, and wherever they stand, darkness has to move back. Fear cannot coexist with faith, and despair cannot dwell in the same room as divine peace. Pain, that's why you may begin to feel resistance in your life right before breakthrough. Because darkness always reacts to approaching light. Pain, the enemy tries to create chaos, distract you from the fact that heaven has already released assistance. But once the angelic presence is established, chaos must surrender. Pain, peace is not passive. It is heaven's way of declaring that God is here. The presence of angels also brings divine clarity. Pain, you begin to understand what once confused you. You see purpose in what once looked like punishment. You recognize timing in what once felt like delay. Pain, the angelic presence opens your spiritual eyes. Suddenly, you realize that not everything that was taken from you was lost. Some of it was divine protection. Pain, you start to see that certain people leaving was actually God's way of making room for better. The same home that once echoed with disappointment becomes the sanctuary of revelation. You see with new perspective. Pain restoration begins a revelation because you cannot be restored to what you do not yet recognize. Angels help you see what heaven sees, and in seeing correctly, pain, you begin to heal completely. Restoration through divine presence doesn't mean God returns everything exactly as it was. Pain means He restores everything according to His design. What was once broken doesn't return its former shape. It returns stronger, wiser, more aligned with divine purpose. That's the kind of healing heaven brings. It doesn't merely erase the pain, it transforms it into wisdom. Pain, the same experience that once you becomes the testimony that strengthens others. The same loss that once crushed you becomes the foundation of your faith. Pain, when divine presence activates restoration, your pain becomes prophecy. What once hurt you now speaks hope through you. The presence of angels also carries divine sound. Pain, you may not hear it with your natural ears, but your spirit begins to recognize the harmony of heaven. Worry has a noise, chaos has a noise, but so does peace. When heaven fills your home, that noise shifts. You begin to think differently. You begin to speak differently. Words of faith replace words of fear. Pain, you stop rehearsing the pain and start declaring the promise. Angels respond to the sound of faith because faith speaks heaven's language. Pain, when your home starts echoing faith instead of fear, the atmosphere becomes fertile for miracles. Restoration doesn't just happen through touch, it happens through sound. Pain, your declaration becomes an invitation for heaven to continue its work. When divine presence is active, healing flows naturally. It doesn't have to be forced. Pain, you don't have to beg God to fix what's broken. His very presence is healing itself, just as light automatically drives out darkness. Pain, the presence of heaven automatically restores what's been damaged. This is why worship is so powerful. It creates space for divine presence. Pain, when you lift your voice in praise even while in pain, you invite angels to dwell in your space. Worship builds a bridge between heaven and earth. Pain, when heaven walks across that bridge, restoration follows behind it. Imagine your home becoming a dwelling place of peace, a sanctuary of hope. Pain, a space where the unseen power of God moves freely. That's what happens when divine presence is honored. Angels don't just visit, they dwell. Pain, they encamp around those who fear the Lord. They guard the doors, they stand over your children, they speak into your dreams. Even while you sleep, heaven is working. Pain, angels are moving furniture in the spiritual realm, rearranging the things that once caused confusion so that they now produce alignment. By the time you wake up, and the unseen has already shifted the scene, restoration through divine presence also restores relationships. When the angelic atmosphere fills your home, forgiveness becomes possible again. The walls were built from years of misstanding start to crumble. Conversations that used to end in conflict begin to end in peace. Pain, the same people who could not stand each other begin to sense something greater pulling them together. That's because angels bring reconciliation. They remind every heart of what truly matters. They carry the fragrance of love that softens bitterness and dissolves pride. And the same home that was divided by pain comes united by grace. Divine presence doesn't only restore relationships, it restores hope. Hope is the oxygen of the spirit. And when it runs low, life itself begins to fade. But when God's presence fills the room, hope rushes back in like breath into dry lungs. You start to dream again, believe again, plan again. You begin to expect miracles again. The voice of impossibility grows quiet under the sound of divine assurance. You start saying things like, pain, I don't know how, but I know God will do it. That's the language of a restored soul. That's what the angelic presence awakens inside you. Pain. Restoration is not always instant, it is progressive. The angels begin their work the moment they arrive, but you experience the fullness over time. They heal layer by layer, paying moment by moment. Just as a wound closes gradually, your heart begins to mend through divine process. Each day feels lighter, each step feels stronger. Pain, and one day you look around and realize that what was once broken has been made whole. The scars remain as proof, not pain. Pain. They tell the story that heaven visited your house and healing took place there. Sometimes divine presence will cause you to release certain things. A restoration is not about collecting everything you lost. It's about keeping what carries life. Angels help you discern what should stay and what must go. Pain. They teach you how to bless the endings and embrace the new beginnings. You begin to understand that letting go is not loss when heaven is in control. Pain. What leaves your hand never leaves God's sight. The presence of angels assures you that whatever departs has served its purpose, and whatever remains will multiply. Pain, divine presence also activates divine provision. When angels are near, lack cannot dominate. It's not always about sudden wealth, it's about sufficiency. Pain, you start to see God's in unexpected places. The resources you need begin to find their way to you because heaven has established your home as a place of purpose. Pain, the same God who sent to the wilderness still sends supply through angels today. Needs get met, opportunities open, and abundance starts to flow where obedience resides. Pain, the restoration God brings through His presence includes your finances, your health, your emotions, and your vision. Nothing broken stays broken when heaven moves in. Pain, you'll notice that divine presence changes not only what you experience, but who you become. You start walking differently. You start talking differently. Pain, your confidence shifts from self-reliance to God-dependence. You become a carrier of peace. Everywhere you go, others can sense something on you. Pain, that's because when angels dwell in your home, they don't just touch the atmosphere, they mark you. You carry that presence with you into your workplace. Pain, your relationships in your daily life. People may not know it's changed, but they will feel it. The peace in your home becomes the peace in your heart. Pain, and that peace becomes a witness to the world. The divine presence of angels teach you that restoration is not a single event. It's a lifestyle of alignment with heaven. Pain, every time you choose faith over fear, every time you speak blessing instead of bitterness, every time you worship instead of worrying, you keep that presence active. Pain, you turn your home into a continuous altar, a place where heaven feels welcome to stay. The more space you give divine presence, the more restoration you experience. And so, pain, as the angels move silently through your life, they carry out heaven's perfect plan. They realign what was twisted, heal what was wounded, and restore what was stolen. Pain, you may not see them, but you will feel their effect. Your laughter returns, your purpose reignites, your strength multiplies. The same space that once sorrow now overflows with joy. That is the miracle of divine presence. It activates restoration from the inside out. Pain, when God sends angels to your home, their very being declares that healing has already begun, and from that moment forward, nothing broken can stay the same. Pain, healing does not begin when the angel arrives. It begins when you make room for the angel to enter. Heaven does not force its way into any heart or home. Pain, God's presence comes where there is invitation, not resistance. Angels move freely where faith has cleared the atmosphere. Pain, but they wait quietly outside where fear has filled the space. The greatest miracles are not birthed in crowded hearts, they are born in surrendered ones. Pain, the moment you make room, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, you create an environment where heaven can operate. Pain, the healing process begins not with divine touch but with human surrender. You cannot invite light into a room that you refuse to open. Likewise, pain, you cannot expect God to move if you will not let go of what is taking His place. When the widow in Scripture opened her door to the prophet Elisha, pain, she did not realize she was opening her door to her own overflow. All she had left was a little oil, a little faith, and a whole lot of fear. Yet when she made room, the oil multiplied. That is the principle of divine accommodation. Whatever space you give to God, He fills. Whatever you reserve for fear, worry, or bitterness becomes territory where heaven cannot freely flow. Healing, therefore, begins with clearing. You cannot pour clean water into a cup filled with poison. Pain, you must pour out what is toxic before heaven pours in what is holy. The broken heart must be emptied before it can be healed. Pain, making room for angels is not about physical space, it is about spiritual atmosphere. It's about deciding that your home will be a place where faith lives louder than fear. Pain, it's about removing the noise of negativity, the clutter of complaints, and the distractions of doubt so that divine whispers can be heard. Angels move where there is peace. Pain, they are drawn to environments that mirror heaven, spaces of gratitude, worship, and expectation. When you fill your home with constant worry, it becomes a place of spiritual congestion. When you fill it with worship, it becomes a runway for divine visitation. Heaven lands where faith lifts. Pain, many people pray for healing but do not make space for it. They want restoration, yet they hold tightly to resentment. They cry out for peace, yet they keep feeding anxiety. Pain, but you cannot occupy your heart with pain and expect peace to dwell there simultaneously. One must leave for the other to enter. Pain, angels cannot dwell in homes filled with unconfessed hurt, unhealed anger, and unspoken bitterness. These are spiritual blockages that suffocate divine movement. Pain, making room for heaven means being honest with yourself and with God about what needs to go. You must confront the bitterness, forgive the offenses, and surrender the control. The moment you do, heaven breathes again. The atmosphere becomes light, and angels begin to move. God's presence does not come to decorate, it comes to dominate. Pain, it will not simply sit beside what is toxic, it will replace it. Holy Spirit is not comfortable coexisting with things that contradict divine truth. So when angels arrive, pain to bring a cleansing wind, they begin to rearrange the spiritual furniture of your life. Sometimes means God will remove certain people, shift your habits, pain, or close some doors you thought you needed open. That's not rejection, it's reordering. Pain Making room for heaven often feels uncomfortable at first because it exposes the areas that have been blocking your blessing. But the very things God removes are the things that have been restricting your healing. Imagine your heart as a house. Some rooms you keep spotless for guests, but others you keep locked, filled with the clutter of old memories and emotional debris. Those locked rooms are where healing must begin. Paying when you unlock them, when you invite God into the painful places, the embarrassing moments, the regrets, pain, and the disappointments, you give Him permission to clean what you've been hiding. Angels are sent to help with this cleansing. They are gentle but thorough. They touch corners you forgot existed. They uncover wounds you've ignored and bring light where shame once hid. It may sting at first because revelation always precedes restoration. But once the light enters, the healing begins to flow. Making room for angels also requires faith and timing. You cannot dictate when God moves, but you can determine how ready you are when He does. Many times, people miss their moment because their hearts are too full of noise to notice heaven knocking. You might be praying for breakthrough, but if you are still clinging to your own plan, you are blocking the very miracle you're asking for. Making room means letting go of your blueprint so God can unfold His. It means trading control for trust. Angels move where obedience resides. When God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham didn't argue. He obeyed. It was at the point of obedience that the angel of the Lord intervened and provided the ram. The miracle didn't happen on the mountain. It happened in the moment Abraham made room for God's will over his own. Sometimes the way you make room is through silence. In a world full of noise, silence is sacred. Angels don't shout over chaos, they speak in stillness. When you quiet your mind, you create a channel for divine communication. God is not ignoring you. He's waiting for you to quiet the distractions so you can hear Him clearly. Making room for angels is making room for awareness. It's slowing down long enough to notice the gentle moves of grace around you. The opportunity that came at the right time, the comfort that arrived through a friend, the peace that settled in your heart for no logical reason. These are angelic movements. But if your mind is overcrowded, you'll miss the signs. Worship is another form of making room. When you worship, you shift the focus from your pain to God's power. You remind your atmosphere who is in charge. Worship turns your home into a sanctuary where angels feel welcome to dwell. Heaven is drawn to gratitude. When Paul and Silas sang in prison, and the chains fell off not only them, everyone around them, worship created space for miracle that logic could not explain. The same principle applies to your home. When you fill your sprays instead of complaints, you invite angels to fill it with power instead of problems. Praise creates the presence where healing can happen. Making room for angels also means being willing to release the past. You cannot embrace new blessings with hands still gripping old pain. The past is a heavy tenant. And as long as you let it occupy, there's no room for fresh grace to move in. Angels are forward movers. They work toward destiny, not history. When you dwell in the past, you're out of sync with heaven's rhythm. To align with divine flow, you must release what was and reach for what is becoming. The moment heaven begins to accelerate the process of restoration. Forgiveness is the key that unlocks spiritual space. Holding on to grudges clutters the soul. You might think you're punishing the person who hurt you, but in reality, you're chaining yourself to pain. Angels cannot operate in bitterness because bitterness is the opposite of divine energy. When you forgive, you break the gear with darkness and renew your alignment with light. Forgiveness is not saying what happened was right. It's saying you refuse to let it rule your heart. It's clearing the spiritual clutter so that angels can move freely. The moment forgiveness flows, healing begins to manifest. Sometimes making room looks like simplifying your life. The more complicated you make things, the less space there is for divine clarity. Angels are masters of order. They bring alignment wherever they dwell. When your priorities are right, God first, faith central, love prevailing, your life becomes open ground for supernatural movement. But when you fill your time with distractions, heaven's work gets delayed. Simplify your schedule. Detach from unnecessary drama. Focus on what carries eternal value. That's where angels work best, within simplicity and sincerity. Making room for angels also requires expectancy. You must expect heaven to move. Faith without expectation, empty ritual. When you wake up in the morning, greet the day as though heaven has already assigned angels to your agenda. Speak over your home with confidence. Declare peace in your rooms, healing in your relationships, abundance in your atmosphere. Angels respond to declarations that align with divine will. They are activated by words of faith. When you speak life into your environment, you are literally constructing spiritual space for heaven to inhabit. The widow of Zarephath didn't know her obedience would sustain her through famine. And she just obeyed the word. When Elijah told her to bake bread for him first, she made room for divine priority. That act of faith opened the door for continuous provision. Every time you obey God, even when it seems inconvenient, you are doing the same. You are making room for heaven's economy to operate in your life. Miracles flow where obedience leads. It's important to understand that making room for heaven doesn't mean your circumstances will instantly change. It means your capacity to handle them will. Angels don't always remove the storm. Sometimes they strengthen you to walk through it without sinking. When your spirit is uncluttered, you can discern divine strategy even in difficulty. You'll begin to notice that your reactions change. The things that used to break you no longer control you. The very moments that once triggered despair now produce deeper faith. That's how you know angels are moving. You're being transformed from the inside out. When you make room, you also make room for revelation. God begins to reveal things that were hidden while your heart was crowded. You see the purpose behind the pain, the lesson behind the loss, and the beauty in the breaking. Revelation itself is a form of healing. When you understand what God was doing, even your wounds start to make sense. The angels of God illuminate the dark places of confusion with light from heaven. You begin to see how everything connects. The heartbreak that led you to prayer. The failure that built your humility. The delay that preserved your destiny. Making room opens your eyes to divine patterns that were invisible before. When angels dwell in an uncluttered atmosphere, they build altars of peace. Every word spoken in faith adds another stone to that altar. Every act of love becomes an offering. Every moment of gratitude strengthens its foundation. Soon, your home becomes a dwelling place of presence. People who enter feel peace without knowing why. They sense warmth without explanation. That's the power of divine habitation. Once you make room, God makes resonance. He doesn't just visit, he abides. Making room for heaven is not a one-time act. It's a daily discipline. Every morning you decide whether fear or faith will occupy your mind. In every conversation you choose whether bitterness or blessing will fill your words. Every decision you determine whether doubt or trust will lead your heart. Each choice either opens or closes spiritual space. Angels still active today, still assigned to homes where hearts remain open. And the more space you give them, the more healing you experience. When heaven finds room, healing becomes effortless. God does not struggle to restore what he created. The only struggle is human resistance. Once resistance is removed, restoration flows naturally. Like sunlight entering an open window, healing enters an open heart, emanates, warms, and revives. Making room for angels is making room for miracles. It's acknowledging that you don't have to do it alone. It's surrendering your strength so heaven can supply its own. If you want heaven to move in your life, stop trying to fit God into your schedule and start building your schedule around him. Stop offering him leftover moments and start giving him first place. Stop asking for blessings to fit your plan and start aligning your plan with his blessing. That's what it means to make room. When you prioritize his presence, he prioritizes your healing. When you clear the space, he fills it. When you empty your hands, and he places wholeness in them. And when the angels finally move freely through your home, you'll feel it. The air will feel lighter. The worry will fade. The tears will carry peace instead of pain. You realize that the healing you've been praying for was never far. It was simply waiting for you to make room. Heaven does not enter crowded hearts, it enters open ones. And when it does, everything broken begins to heal, not by effort, but by presence. That's the quiet miracle of a surrendered life. When you make room for heaven, heaven fills every empty place until nothing broken remains. When God sends angels to your home, there comes a sacred stillness that words can hardly describe. It's not the kind of quiet that feels empty or lonely. It's the peace that carries presence, the unmistakable awareness that something divine has entered the atmosphere. Heaven's messengers are not merely visitors. They are vessels of God's will, carrying his light, his healing, and his authority into every broken space of your life. They do not come for ceremony or spectacle. When they come on a sign, when angels arrive, they come with a mission: to restore order where chaos has reigned, to rebuild where destruction has occurred, and to reignite faith where it tried to extinguish hope. Every time heaven intervenes through angelic visitation, it's not random, it's strategic. God never wastes movement. He sends angels when the time of human striving has reached its limit, when natural efforts can no longer sustain what God intends to complete. Angels represent the divine transition from human effort to heavenly execution. They come to demonstrate that what God begins in your life, he's faithful to finish. When your home has been filled with the weight of worry, with the residue of disappointment, or with the echo of painful words, the atmosphere itself can feel heavy. Pain. You may not realize it, but spiritual environments affect everything: your peace, your energy, your clarity, even your relationships. Angels come to shift that atmosphere. And they move invisibly but powerfully, cleansing the air of spiritual toxins, replacing the heaviness of sorrow with the fragrance of joy. Pain, the sound of chaos with the melody of peace. It is as though heaven opens the windows of your home, lets fresh divine wind blow through every room of your heart. Pain, the transformations when angels enter, is both internal and external. God never heals from the outside in, he heals from the inside out. Pain, angels begin their work in the unseen, the soul, the spirit, the mind. They touch the thoughts that have grown dark with doubt. Pain, they mend emotions that have been bruised by betrayal. They restore faith that has been buried under disappointment. Once the internal healing begins, everything external starts to align. Opportunities start to appear, relationships begin to mend. Clarity replaces confusion. Pain, you begin to notice coincidences that aren't coincidences at all. They're divine coordination. Angels operate in obedience to God's word. Pain, and wherever his word is believed and spoken, angels are activated. That's why worship, prayer, pain, and faith-filled declarations are not just spiritual rituals, they're divine summons. When you speak God's truth in your home, you build a runway for angels to land on. Pain, you give them permission to move, to minister, to execute the will of heaven in your situation. Pain, that's why the enemy tries so hard to silence your faith and fill your speech with fear, because fear paralyzes what faith activates. Pain, the moment you shift from saying, I can't, to God can, heaven starts moving. But understand this, when angels come, pain, their presence often exposes what is out of alignment. Divine light reveals disorder, not to condemn you, but to correct you. Before healing can fully manifest, pain, truth must surface. Sometimes angels stir up what's been hidden so that it can be released. You might start feeling emotions you've suppressed. Pain or old memories may come to the surface. That's not regression, it's cleansing. God is purifying the foundation so that healing can be sustained. Pain doesn't just fix what's broken, he restores what's missing. And angels are his agents in that process. Throughout Scripture, when angels visited homes, pain, transformation followed. When the angel visited Mary, purpose was conceived. When the angel came to Joseph, direction was clarified. When angels came to Lot's house, pain, deliverance was released. Every visitation carried change, and every change carried both challenge and blessing. Because before you can step into newness, something old has to be left behind. Angels often come to move you forward, even when you feel like standing still. They come to undo what's been bound, to free you from attachments that hinder growth, to nudge you from comfort zones that no longer fit your calling. Healing in the divine sense, pain is not simply the absence of pain, it's the restoration of purpose. God doesn't just want to soothe your wounds, and he wants to show you why the wound existed in the first place. He uses angels to realign you with destiny. They whisper divine reminders when your spirit forgets its identity. Pain, they remind you that you are not what you lost, you are not what you went through, and you are not what others said about you. Pain, you are who God designed you to be before the foundation of the world. And the moment that truth takes root in your heart, the healing becomes permanent. Sometimes, pain, angels bring strength as they did to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Other times they bring revelation as they did to Daniel in Babylon. But in every case, pain, your purpose is to lift what the human soul can no longer carry. They are the unseen hands that hold you up when you're too tired to stand. Pain, when grief grips your chest and prayer feels impossible, it's an angel that stirs the ember of hope in your spirit. When fear tries to paralyze your decisions, pain, an angel whispers courage into your mind. And when you feel forgotten, an angel reminds you that heaven still knows your name. When angels are at work in your home, pain, the ordinary becomes sacred. You begin to sense that your living room isn't just a room, it's an altar. Your table becomes a place of communion. Pain, your hallway becomes a path of peace. The same space where arguments once echoed now resonates with forgiveness. And the same bed where you cried yourself to sleep becomes the place where you dream again. That is what it means when everything broken starts to heal. Pain, the physical doesn't just change, the spiritual does. The power of angelic movement in your home is not measured by noise or display. It's measured by peace. The Bible says that when angels appeared to the shepherds, their first words were, "Fear not." Every true encounter with heaven carries peace as its signature. So, pain, when you begin to feel a stillness settle over your home, when anxiety begins to lift for no explainable reason, pain, understand that it's not just time passing, it's heaven passing through. Angels are at work. Sometimes they protect you from dangers you never even see. Pain, you might call it luck. that you left the house 2 minutes late and avoid an accident, but heaven calls it divine intervention. Pain, you might call it timing, that the job came just when you were about to give up, but angels call it obedience to divine schedule. They operate with precision, ensuring that every connection, every delay lines up with heaven's timeline. Because the God who sends them is not random, he is exact. And yet, while angels bring divine power, they never take God's place. They are messengers, not masters. Their purpose is to point you back to the source. Pain, when you begin to sense angelic movement, it's a reminder not to worship the messenger, but to worship the one who sent them. Pain, they are not substitutes for God's presence. They are extensions of it. They come to usher you in a deeper communion with him, not to replace it. The real miracle is not just that angels visit, it's that through their visitation, you learn to recognize the nearness of God himself. Pain, the broken parts of your life begin to heal. Don't rush the process. Angels work according to divine order. Healing is not always instant, sometimes it's incremental. Pain, there are layers to restoration, physical, relational, spiritual, and heaven moves through each one with care. God's healing is thorough as his love is complete. Angels peel back pain layer by layer until all that remains is peace. They don't rush your recovery. Pain, they honor your journey. Every tear you've cried becomes a testimony in progress. If you could see what heaven sees when angels are at work, you would never doubt again. Pain, you'd see light weaving through dark places, hope threading itself into hopeless situations, and love surrounding wounds that once seemed unhealable. You'd see heaven writing redemption over every scar, declaring beauty for ashes and strength for sorrow. But because we walk by faith, not by sight, we must trust that even when we don't see the movement, it's happening. Faith is the bridge that allows angels to work unhindered. Doubt creates barriers. Faith opens doors. Angels also carry the power of divine communication. Sometimes the way they heal is through revelation, a sudden understanding, a divine idea, a word of knowledge. You might wake up with clarity you didn't have before, or find peace about a decision that once terrified you. That's not coincidence. That's revelation. Angels deliver divine insight that heals confusion, because often confusion is the root of frustration, and once light enters, peace follows. In some seasons, angels don't change your situation at all, they change you. They strengthen your resilience, refine your patience, deepen your faith. Pain, they remind you that healing is not just about restoration, it's about transformation. When God heals something, he doesn't return it to what it was. Pain elevates it beyond whatever could have been. The healed version of you will always be stronger, wiser, than more compassionate than the unbroken version. When angels move through your home, even time begins to heal. You start to look back at your past without bitterness. Pain, the memories that once wounded you begin to lose their sting. You start seeing purpose in pain, design in delay, and mercy in moments that once felt like judgment. Pain, that's when you know healing is complete, when the past no longer defines you but refines you. And yet, pain, when the greatest signs that angels have touched your home is forgiveness. Healing always leads to release. Pain, you can't hold on to resentment and expect restoration to flourish. Angels often stir your heart to forgive, not because others deserve it, but because you deserve freedom. They whisper, let it go, because heaven cannot fill hands that are still gripping pain. When you forgive, you don't lose, you gain. You gain peace. You gain clarity. Pain, you gain access to blessings that were blocked by bitterness. Angels rejoice when forgiveness flows, because it signals that heaven's will is being fulfilled on earth. Pain, as healing deepens, your home begins to reflect heaven's order. Joy turns, laughter returns, hope returns. You find yourself waking up with gratitude instead of grief. Pain, expectation instead of anxiety. You start seeing beauty in small things again. The way sunlight falls through the window, the sound of your own heartbeat. Pain, the quiet assurance that you are still here, still breathing, still chosen. Angels celebrate those moments with you, because every sign of life in a broken soul is a victory for heaven. And the greatest miracle of all is that once your home becomes healed, pain, it becomes a place of healing for others. Just as angels visited you, your presence becomes angelic to someone else. You become the vessel through which heaven moves. Your words begin to carry healing, your actions begin to carry grace, your love becomes contagious. The very atmosphere that once carried heaviness now carries hope. Pain, and those who enter your space begin to sense what you once felt, the peace that passes understanding, the assurance that God has been here. That is the legacy of angelic visitation. It doesn't just heal the moment, it transforms the future. It turns pain into purpose, chaos into clarity, and sorrow into song. Pain, when God sends angels to your home, they don't come to visit. They come to dwell until restoration is complete. They don't leave when the healing begins, and they remain until it's fulfilled. And long after you stop feeling their presence, the results of their work will speak. Pain. So if you are in a season where everything seems to be falling apart, do not despair. The breaking is not the end. It's the signal that heaven is near. Pain angels are already on a stand. They're already standing guard over your home, already whispering peace into your nights. Pain, already carrying your prayers before the throne of God. The work may be invisible, but is inevitable. Healing is happening. Restoration is in progress. Heaven is not silent. Pain, heaven is active. And when the day comes that you look around and realize that what once was broken has begun to heal, that the weight has lifted, pain, that the tears have turned to worship, you will know without a doubt, God sent angels to your home. They came not just to mend what was lost, but to make all things new. Pain, in that divine newness, you will walk not as one who merely survived, but as one who was supernaturally restored by the mercy of a faithful God, who still sends angels into broken homes to make them whole again.